Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get the webinar started. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm very pleased to have with me Amelia Mansfield with Burton Planning, who will be presenting for you this morning as a part of our Active Transportation Academy, a course overview on the Complete Streets Implementation course, which is a new addition to the Active Transportation Academy's offerings. We will be sharing information later in the webinar concerning how you can request a session of this course if you find the information to be of interest to you and your agency. With that said, I also want to mention that we will be opening the phone lines for questions later in the webinar. Right now we have everyone joining in a muted status. However, on the left-hand side of your screen, hopefully you see a chat pod on the bottom left-hand side, and you can ask questions there. If you don't see the chat pod, you probably see a circle with a thought bubble in it. Just click on that and it'll display the chat pod on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. We are also attempting to record this webinar. If we're successful, we will post a link to that recording on our website. However, please don't let that dampen your enthusiasm for asking questions during the webinar, because I'm certain if you have that question, there are a lot of other folks who have the same question and would love to know the answer. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Amelia. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, great. Good morning, everybody. As Victoria introduced me, my name is Amelia. I'm a planning manager with Burton Planning Services, and my roles with the Active Transportation Academy include a few things. The first is I'm the project manager helping to keep the program running for ODOT. I work on developing courses, such as the one that I'm going to introduce to you today. And then I also have the pleasure of coming out to your communities and instructing some of these courses. So today's agenda is going to include an overview of the Active Transportation Academy. I'm going to describe the full course learning objectives for the Complete Streets Implementation training. That way you understand what it is we hope you all will get out of it. And then I'm going to go into some highlighted topics from the full Complete Streets Implementation training agenda. I'm not going to go through the entire course because it takes 4 hours to complete normally, but hopefully it piques your interests and leads you to sign up for hosting a course in your community. And then we're going to talk about how you can apply. So the Active Transportation Academy is in existence to offer training to you and your communities to reach your active transportation goals. These trainings and workshops are free to communities throughout Ohio. Any local jurisdiction is happy to apply. This includes schools, school districts, governments, health departments, parks and rec departments. The list goes on, just so long as you are affiliated with a local jurisdiction. And if you aren't, you are encouraged to partner with one of those that I just listed in order to bring it to your community. We do offer professional development credits for the attendees, so that is something that can be very appealing to them. And if you are interested in more information, you'll be able to click on that link when it's available in a PDF format, or you can always Google ODOT LTAP Active Transportation Academy and get there as well. So recently, in the past year, we rebranded from the Safe Routes Academy to the Active Transportation Academy to reflect a broader offering of courses. So right now I'm going to share with you what courses we have available, and you'll probably understand why it used to be called the Safe Routes Academy when I get to the next few slides. So new courses that we have launched this year include community traffic calming programs, conducting walk and bike audits, which is a very interactive, get on the streets, literally type of workshop, health and equity in transportation, and then now the Complete Streets Implementation course. All of those are 4 hours long, and every single one of the courses that I'm going to quickly go over right now include interactive components. We want to make sure that the instructor isn't just talking at your group of trainees. We want to make sure everyone's there, engaged in dialogue, working on things, and walking away with something tangible that they can then move forward in their communities for their active transportation goals. So these Train the Trainer courses might feel more familiar with regard to safe routes to school, and these have been around for a few years now. And so these, again, are 4 hours each. We have a walking school bus course and adult school crossing guard course, Girls in Gear, which is helping to teach or training adults to encourage girls to safely and I guess efficiently ride their bikes and walk to get to where they need to go, and then conducting a school walk audit. So again, these 4 courses are very hands-on, feet on the ground, definitely not just sitting in a classroom looking at a presentation. So I think that can be attractive to you as well when you're thinking about hosting a course. So the other Safe Routes to School related courses we have are more implementation focused. So we have a Safe Routes to School lessons plan, which is 8 hours long. You can probably imagine it takes a long time to create a lesson plan, and so to be able to teach you on how to do that also takes a while. We have the school travel plan development as well, non-infrastructure implementation, and then incorporating safe routes to school into wellness, school and community policy and planning, and then safety and active transportation, school and community planning. So you can probably imagine that a lot of these do involve school districts and schools, and that is true, but we also encourage local municipalities and other local jurisdiction partners to be a part of it, because it definitely takes a village to make these kind of programs work. So coming soon, we'll have even more available for you. We'll have an online, on-demand school crossing guard training available that you'll be able to take at your own leisure and still walk away with a certificate of completion for that. We are going to be launching Advocating for Active Transportation and creating a Vision Zero action plan later this fall. So stay tuned for information from LTAP on those when they become available. So let's get into the Complete Streets implementation course and what you would expect to have be your learning outcomes when you have completed the course. So the course is organized to meet these 4 goals that are listed here. So first of all, we want to make sure that any trainee understands the meaning of the term complete streets. It can be confusing at times, and different organizations have different definitions, so we want to get that out in the open and have a discussion about that. We also want everyone to understand the need for importance of complete streets. So what's the background information that makes us even offer a course like this, and then what are some of the particularities in your own community that we can touch on in that training to help you understand why you might want it in your community specifically. The third goal is identifying effective complete streets plans and policies and their components. So understanding that no 2 complete streets related policies or plans are alike, but there are definitely ways that you can effectively integrate complete streets into the plans and policies you have. And so understanding what the different components are that you would want to make sure are included in those policies and plans is definitely an intended outcome of this course. And then ultimately, we want you to be able to develop a draft complete streets implementation strategy. So you won't walk out of the course with this, but you will walk out with a roadmap, if you will, for how you could bring that into your community and what steps you would take to get there and who you would involve. So the next section of the webinar today is going to be me going through what the presentation materials would actually include during the training that you would be hosting in your community. But again, since these trainings last 4 hours and we are only together for an hour today, I'm going to skip over a lot of things, but I just want to make sure that you understand the main points that we would be touching on in that training so that you can get an understanding of how it might be relevant to the people you're inviting to participate and what they might walk away with. So the first section is Complete Streets 101. So like I said, having everyone work together to define complete streets. And so we start with different definitions that different organizations that we may or may not be familiar with, but that are related to the planning and engineering and public health professions might describe complete streets as being. And so note to people.
It's
Yes?
Victoria. I didn't
Mhm.
know if you had advanced the slide or not, but I wasn't seeing it on my side, so I'm guessing others might not have either.
Oh, I have. Yep. It says
Okay.
defining complete streets.
Okay. I'm still
Okay.
seeing the goals.
Okay.
So,
I'll toggle really quick just to see
okay.
if it helps. Okay. Well, hopefully the slides catch up.
Can
But
someone else maybe put in the chat pod? Oh, they're saying they see it fine. Okay, it must just be me then. All right, keep
oh,
going. You're good.
okay. It'll be a surprise for you, Victoria.
Thanks.
Okay. So something that we like to start off with is by saying that no two people are going to say it alike, but the main point of Complete Streets is to ensure that streets are safe for people of all ages and abilities and that we balance the needs of different modes. And so we have here some different definitions that come from Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition. And so we go into each of these and talk about them briefly, highlighting there in bold font the different pieces and parts of those three definitions that come from that organization's documents, just to talk about how even within an organization there might be different ways of defining it, depending on who the user is, the user being the user of the definition, or who the professional is that's actually using the definition to guide their work. We also talk about how the National Complete Streets Coalition specifically goes even further than those more common definitions of complete streets to talk about how complete streets should also support local land uses, economies, cultures, and natural environments. And that add-on is something that seems to be more and more prevalent in the past few years, and so we'll start to see complete streets definitions being expanded to be even more comprehensive than they were before. And so that can be a refreshing thing for people to hear, but it could also be daunting because, you know, at first you're thinking we're just going to be we're just going to be accommodating all different users in a safe and efficient manner on our roadways where applicable, but now we're also talking about supporting land use and economies and cultures and natural environments. So it's becoming a huge undertaking, and the case is that it is true, but we want to make sure that we offer all of you in this training some different tools to think about how to integrate these expanding definitions. We also take the approach of giving definitions that come from, you know, more transportation-related entities. So the United States DOT has a few definitions that might be more familiar to engineers and transportation professionals, so we talk about those as well, understanding that making the transportation network safer and more efficient tends to be the underlying goal of those complete streets definitions. Then we also talk about some different organizations that may not be as understood to be as relatable to complete streets, but that definitely include it in their mission. And so AARP is one of them. And you'll hear me and the other instructors during the full course really refer to AARP quite a lot. They do have a robust program all about livability, regardless of the age of the people that you're trying to serve in your community. And so they have different definitions for it as well. And so we take the approach of providing different definitions from different types of organizations, but then we also want to make sure that the people that are there in the training offer their own definitions as well. So we got into some conversations about how others would define complete streets. The next thing we like to talk about is the origination of the concept of complete streets and how it's evolved over time. Not everyone fancies the history lesson, but we think it's very important to understand where it all came from. And sometimes this can be helpful too when pitching to your local decision makers and elected officials complete streets and bringing them into your community to be able to explain where it came from. And so we talk about how it's over 10 years old now, and that originally it came in response to car-centric planning. And so the term complete streets was coined by the organization America Bikes as it was developing a new policy initiative with the goal of ensuring that the same rights and safe access for all users of streets, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders, were accommodated. And so the movement spread really quickly, and the next thing you know, in 2005, a short 2 years after Complete Streets was first introduced, you had the National Complete Streets Coalition formed, and they continue to be a major player in the Complete Streets movement. And so its founding members included a wide range of different organizations that may call to the different elected officials and decision makers in your communities, but also the trainees who are participating in this course. So everything from the American Planning Association to America Bikes, Smart Growth America, and the list goes on and on. So we talk about that a bit. And then also to say that about 9 years after the first Complete Streets policy was passed, there were over 500 Complete Streets policies across the nation. And so understanding how that just blew up over that course of less than 10 years is inspiring, and also can be a great model for communities. And so we also then talk about how currently we have over 1,400 policies across the nation, 23 in Ohio jurisdictions, and here's an opportunity if we are hosting this training in a community that has a policy to pat them on the back and recognize that as we're giving the presentation. So we also want to get into Complete Streets related concepts, and so in the actual course content we get into each of these in a bit of detail. For the sake of this webinar, I just have this slide listing what they are. A lot of these terms are familiar to people, but they may not be familiar with relation to Complete Streets, and so we get into a conversation about that. So everything from equity and social related concepts to planning and engineering related concepts, and public health as well. So helping people understand that regardless of what their sector is or what their background is, there are concepts related to it that can easily be tied in. We also get into some history on the effects of, or what affects the form and function of streets. So we talk about the history of suburbanization and auto-oriented sprawl and development, land use and how that plays in. We talk about different federal policies that encourage suburban development. So everything from the GI Bill in the 40s that guaranteed the home loans to veterans and spurred the rapid suburban development, and even then redlining. We talk about the Federal the Federal Aid Highway Act from the 50s and constructing highways and leading to the growing middle class having more private automobiles, moving out into the suburbs, and then what happened in the downtown areas, what happened to the rural areas. We talk about the commuting culture and how there's a long history of this in America, and even though we hear in the news that some of that's changing, how has that affected the form and function of our streets as they've been built and retrofitted over the years. And we also talk about design and how this affects the form and function of streets and whether or not they're complete. So we talk about things that planners might, and engineers definitely alike, have a lot of familiarity with. And so what's the ramification for wide roads and deep setbacks, and what happens when there aren't intersections very close together? What does that mean for people who are walking and biking? What about the way that businesses and the land that they develop looks? So with big box retail and pushing the stores back far away from the streets. And then we talk about separation of land uses as well. And so how does all of this affect complete streets and the way that they might be built in the future? So we also get into different benefits and challenges of complete streets, and they're lumped into these 4 different categories. And again, I think you're seeing a common thread here that we aim to make sure that the content in this training is relevant to anyone who might be in the room at the training. So everything from planners to engineers to public health professionals, residents have attended our Active Transportation Academy courses before. So we want to make sure that the benefits and the challenges and all of the different topics that we're talking about relate to these categories here. So with the challenges of complete streets, we go through each of these in this bullet pointed list in more detail, and we actually offer some suggestions for ways that they could be corrected. For example, if we talk about building new versus retrofitting existing roadways, and this is a challenge. And so how does a community make the decision to retrofit their existing roadways to include complete streets, or how do they make sure that when they're building new roads that complete streets are integrated? And so we talk a bit about building into the land development regulations, different ways for developers or property owners to help with the cost of building those new complete streets. We talk about different policies that you might put in place to ensure that as you're retrofitting existing roadways, funds are being allocated to providing bicycle and pedestrian and transit accommodations, as an example. And so we go through the list and offer different solutions, as well as describing what the actual challenges might be. And we talk with the people that are at the training about what challenges they're experiencing in their community if they aren't listed in this presentation. So we also talk about the benefits of complete streets, and so we take some time to go through, again, those 4 categories there along the far left column, and we apply them to these different benefits that are in buckets along the top row there. And the way that I like to describe this is it's not just helping everyone in the room understand what the benefits of complete streets are, because frankly they probably have an understanding already of what they might be, but I like to think of this matrix as being something that people can walk away with and then refer back to when they are talking with potential partners, potential funders, elected officials, and decision makers, based on what that person's driving interest is. They can pull from this matrix. Okay, so if you are an economic developer, I'll probably want to hit the talking points along that row. If you're an environmental advocate, I probably want to pick some talking points from that bottom row, and so on and so forth. And so we go through these, and ultimately, once we get through the whole matrix and talking about it, there's some fun visuals for people to laugh about and to spark some conversation, but we definitely go through those benefits and spend some time on them. Something else that we've included in this training are a lot of before and after visualizations of complete streets projects from across the nation. Actually, I should say from across North America, because this is from Ontario, Canada. But Complete Streets Canada specifically does a great job of documenting conditions before and after implementing Complete Streets. So I made sure to use an example from their website. But in this case, there was this road that was splitting a residential area from a commercial area, and the population who lived and worked around there didn't really want to walk along this roadway, and there was this perceived and actual barrier then between the marketplace and the residential area. And so by retrofitting the road, as you see on the right, they were able to make it much more vibrant and user-friendly for bicyclists and pedestrians and motorists. And I guess even now the shopping area is seeing a lot more business as well. So we get into some different examples of that. There are a bunch of examples in between that first one and this one that I'm showing you, but I want to also demonstrate that we're highlighting different tools and resources as well. And so NACTO's Urban Street Design Guide, which a lot of you may reference on a day-to-day basis, is something that's available out there both in hard copy format and online. And so in the actual training, we go to the website for this and we take a look at the before and after renderings and images that are included in there, and talk about how to actually use the Urban Street Design Guide, so that people can know that it's a tool and a reference that's out there for them. And then the first activity of the training would be the critique the street training, excuse me. And so in this, we'll split the group out into smaller groups and give them about 15 minutes to critique examples of street infrastructure, renderings and photographs, and so they can identify what changes could be made to the built environment in order to make the street more complete. And then We'll also lead them in a discussion about what challenges the community might face in their efforts to make the street more complete. And so then the ultimate goal is to offer some possible solutions to address those challenges, both the physical challenges, but also the political and perceived challenges that local decision makers and residents and property owners might be sharing. So the next section of the training is the components and best practices of complete street strategies. And so we first go into passing out a handout. This here from the National Complete Streets Coalition are the key implementation steps for Complete Streets initiatives. And so even though it doesn't necessarily need to be followed in order, it's a great handout to be hanging up on a bulletin board in your office. So when you're thinking about how to implement your Complete Streets initiatives, you can see these main steps right there. During the training, we focus on a lot of the steps that are on this, but not all of them. So that's another reason to send it home with the trainees. It's definitely a strong approach to start with adopting a policy, which is the first item on that list. And so that is what we start with here. So we talk about what is a Complete Streets policy, not just what are complete streets, but when we say policy, what do we mean? And so the main takeaway from this is that policy is a very loose term when it comes to this. There are many different types, and so on the left-hand side or left-hand column, you see all the different types generalized for sure, and then on the right-hand side, different types of actions that are required to actually, make that policy effective. And so, who's the responsible entity that either has to drive this effort or has to approve that effort? And so we talk about that, and hopefully people who are participating in the training start to see how their role fits in versus who it is in their community they might be going to talk about instituting one of these types of policies if they're interested. We then talk about, okay, so we know now what we mean when we say a policy. It could be a wide variety of different things, but there are definitely 10 elements that according to the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a very tried and true resource, that they say need to be included in a policy, and we agree. And so we go through each of these 10 elements and talk about them in much more detail. Again, this is a part of the priming the trainees for walking away understanding what it is they need to do in order to implement complete streets in their community. And so then, similar to having the add-ons to the definition of complete streets, we're now thinking about adding additional elements to complete streets policies that aren't in that list of 10 items. And so this being things like the physical environment, recreation, placemaking. So what says physical environment, it probably is a misnomer. I should probably say more natural environment. So how do we integrate natural elements like streams or forests? How do we integrate recreation into complete streets? Both from the perspective of complete streets are there for utility, but people are also getting from point A to point B, and recreation might be at the ends of that. It also might be along it when you're talking about things like multi-use trails. And then also placemaking. So if the streets are complete, then the neighborhood might be more conducive to a placemaking effort, or if you have a placemaking effort in a community, then complete streets might be a next step. So understanding the relation between those. Something that I love to show off is this interactive map that that shows all of the different complete streets policies nationwide. I refer to this a lot, and so I want to be able to show it during the training as well. And so opening the website, poking around, understanding how it works and how people might use it. But it organizes all of the complete streets policies across the nation that are reported to the National Complete Streets Coalition. So it may not be an exhaustive list, but it goes into categorizing them based on jurisdiction type, policy type, and so it can be a great resource when trying to find policies to model after. And so if you're a township, for example, and you really want to see what some other townships are doing across the nation, then that's a great way to start. If you're interested in doing an ordinance, then you can search by that. If you're interested in seeing townships that have adopted ordinances, then you can focus in on that even further. So it is a great tool, and it's something that we want to highlight. We also want to talk about some specific best practices in complete streets, understanding that there might be some throughout Ohio that are worth mentioning. There are also others throughout the nation that we've highlighted based on different policy type, but also different type of jurisdiction that originated the plan or the policy. That way, no matter who's in the training, there is some kind of relevance to the different best practices examples that we're focusing on. So we talk about the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission's regional policy and how that associates with regional transportation funding and the big picture look at complete streets. So from the regional perspective, from the funding perspective, and then the different types of tools that they've incorporated in there to make it more user-friendly for the communities that are following that policy. Here's another example. This one picked out because it was a county, this one Arlington County in Virginia, and that it was a master transportation plan. So not everyone thinks of a transportation plan as being a complete streets quote-unquote policy, but it definitely can fit that if it includes those 10 elements that were listed a few slides before. And so we talk about this one where they had been considered a leader in transit-oriented development and smart growth and had been innovative with different multimodal policies for years, but they weren't doing any of that under a formalized complete streets policy. So then talking about how they actually formalize the policy and fit it into their existing work. And so that might apply to a lot of your communities. You may already be doing a lot of this complete streets related work, but you just want to formalize it. So this is a great case study for that. Then we also talk about cities, and so here we have Wenatchee, Washington, and they actually have what seems the most obvious, a complete streets policy. And so it includes a strong vision, implementation steps, and references to existing guidance and policy documents. And so that was something we wanted to pull out as well, of drawing the connection between existing policies and plans. Just because it's a new policy that's more overarching doesn't mean it shouldn't be specific in the existing policies and plans that it's pointing to. And then we also talk about street design standards. And so Columbia, Missouri is another city, but again, something that may not be as obvious, being deemed a complete streets policy, could be something like street design standards. So here we talk about exactly how they've integrated complete streets into their street design standards, some specific challenges with that, and how they are tackling retrofitting projects because they aren't building very many new streets, which is pretty common across communities. So how do you make that work? So then we have our next activity in the training, and so in this one we would hand out sample policies and some questions developed from how the Complete Streets Coalition actually evaluates their policies, and we have a small group answer questions about them. And so the idea is to be able to critically analyze some different policy types and be able then to report back out to the group and say, we reviewed the city's street design standards, or we reviewed this MPO's overarching complete streets policy, et cetera, and here are the things that really worked well, here are the elements that are missing. And so it's a great way to be able to subjectively look at a policy, but then also not have to worry about being critical of your own right off the bat. You probably want to do that with your coworkers in the comfort of your own office. So we're not asking people to bring things with them and share where they're lacking or where they're strong. We're just having people look at existing ones that are out there. So the next section that we get into is planning for implementation, which is probably a big push for why people even come to this training. And so we spend quite a bit of time, over an hour, on this section, talking about the different people, processes, performance and professional development efforts that would need to be included in Complete Streets implementation. So first we get into picking partners. So, understanding that as communities begin Complete Streets efforts, they're going to have to decide who to include in various implementation steps. And so Complete Streets just inherently requires an inclusive decision-making process. We've seen examples where it's very insular and it just doesn't turn out very well, since it does touch so many different departments and different efforts and different topics in a community. Having partners that are cross-sector and also lay folk and different people from the community is really, really important. We also talk about the effects of Complete Streets programs on local policies and processes. So you already have policies and programs and processes in place. So how will implementing a Complete Streets program in your community affect those? What policies, plans, and processes are going to be affected? And where are these what we call strategic points of intervention? Where are what are the initial policies, plans, and processes that you really need to be looking at first and foremost? And so we talk in depth about that and how to actually understand how it might impact your specific community's policies and processes that are in existence. Performance measures is something that I know I've seen a lot of webinars on recently. There's a lot of literature out on it. A lot of your communities already have them, which is a great starting point. And we definitely spend a lot of time in this training talking about them, not just what are they, but what kind of performance measures are available, what sort of data sources are reasonable to use in order to track the performance measures over time, what kind of format of them and what kind of functionality do you want them to have, how do you actually develop them, borrowing from others and not always thinking about starting from scratch, looking at your existing policies and plans and taking from those to make it cohesive across your organization's efforts. And then we talk about different examples and best practices as well. There are some more detailed slides in this overview webinar about performance measures, just to demonstrate that it is something that is highlighted within this training specifically. And so we do talk about the process of developing measures, and so here are some different rules to live by, and we get into talking about those a lot, but I've mentioned these on the prior slide, but just the idea again of not doing it alone, looking at established goals in your community and your plans and taking from them, utilizing data that's already available to you, and making sure that your measures are quantifiable, simple, easy to understand, and that you're tracking progress toward a goal. And so we have some time to play around with some performance measures so that you can walk away feeling confident that you understand what it means. And then some resources as well to look back on when you're sitting down with your partners and actually trying to develop them for your Complete Streets projects. So again, we get into best practices for performance measures. And so I had mentioned borrowing from others. So if you're, for example, under the purview of an MPO, you might take a look at the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and see what kind of goals are in there and see if you could use them. You might be looking at partner organizations to see what kind of goals or metrics they already have and if you can borrow them. Wanting to make sure that you establish baseline data, and so this goes into that conversation of not just thoughtfully choosing a performance measure based on outcomes that you're hoping for or existing goals and strategies that are in your plans and policies already, but can you actually track it? Do you have access to data that can establish a baseline and that you'll be able to access over time? And then we talk about sharing the responsibility of tracking performance, not just relying on yourself or your intern or whomever it might be, but working with partners and sharing that load, and also understanding that you can't be the expert of every single data source. We get into best practices, and so one example is the Seattle Performance Report, and during the training we'll open it up and we'll look through it, as we will do with a few others, but demonstrating different ways that different communities have actually tracked performance, but also how they've communicated it. So making sure that the way that it's communicated is user-friendly, both for the practitioners who are using it, but also for the public if you're making it publicly available. So we also talk about, in Complete Streets implementation, the importance of training and education. And so this is training and education not just for the planners and engineers and elected officials, but this is also for advocates and for partner organizations like school districts or public health departments. So understanding who needs the training and education, at what point in your Complete Streets implementation that they need it, and then what sort of training and for whom. And so we go into different training types and the different audiences that it might be appropriate for. And then we also talk about different types of training and education opportunities that may not be as common. Things like special events like these tours or dinners. Like I've seen examples of metro parks having like a Rails to Trails kind of event where they have everyone come and have a fancy white tablecloth dinner on the actual rail trail before it's the ribbons cut. And so being able to talk about, you know, why was this important and how are we going to make it happen again, having informal conversations. So whether it's you or whether it's your Complete Streets advocate out in the community, when they're out for dinner and they run into someone and something comes up, that they understand, you know, how to talk about it in an informal setting without making it seem too preachy. So we talk about all of that, and then we also talk about where you might get access to those different types of trainings. Funding is something that we know everyone is always very interested in, and so we do talk about different funding sources for Complete Streets. Again, I'm not going to go into the details during this overview webinar, but we put them into these buckets here, and we also customize a lot of this information for the specific host community that's having us give the training. So if there are different funding sources that are only applicable to your community, we make sure to put them in here. That way people who are at the training can walk away with this presentation and the actual sources that are most relevant to them in there. I'd like to show this. I think this is a pretty neat matrix, but providing some really easy to reference funding information as well. And so this is just one example for federal and state sources, but we aim to try to make the information that we provide in these trainings usable as well. And so it seems highly likely that someone will refer back to this rather than a slide that just had a bunch of words on it. So we hope that you can look forward to seeing some of these more visual references in the training. So then we get into the tools and resources for Complete Streets. And again, these are the 4 buckets that we share with you, the publications and reports, and so we give a list of those. We take a look at a few of them so that you can understand how to use them. We talk about different organizations, actual tools that are out there, like for example, AARP's Livability Index is an example of that. And then different one-stop shops. So is there an entity either in your community or nationwide that offers a lot of this information in one place that you can just point to? And so we get into that in detail and aim to make sure that you can walk away with a few pages of a presentation that have these hyperlinks that you can go to on your own. So last but not least, we end the training with this activity, My Steps to Complete Streets Implementation. And so the idea with this is that you will follow a flowchart or decision tree that will help guide you through the creation of a Complete Streets plan or policy. So what are your steps? Who would you involve? What kind of training would these people need and when? What sort of performance measures are you interested in having? Who's the audience for them? What kind of data do you have available to you, and so on and so forth. So you'll walk away with a sheet of paper that has some of these main steps highlighted on it and who the people are that you need to engage off the bat. That way when you get back to your office the next day, you can start working on it and have something that's easy to follow and tangible in your hands. So the full course agenda is what you see here on the screen. So we spend 4 hours together. Like I said, we do several activities. We're talking about the background of Complete Streets. How do you define it? How do you talk about it to your partners and to your constituents? What are the different strategies to help you achieve Complete Streets and implement it? And then how do you actually plan for the implementation of Complete Streets in your community? And so, like I said before, we really aim to make this very interactive, have a lot of conversation, a lot of opportunities to ask questions and learn from one another, and walk away with hyperlinks to click on and sheets of paper to hang up on your bulletin board and to share with your coworkers to actually make Complete Streets happen in your community if they aren't already well on their way. So you might be wondering, how do I apply? Either for this course or any of the others that I outlined at the beginning. You just have to click on this link here, which will be available in the PDF version that's available after this training, excuse me, after this webinar. But again, like I said, you can always Google ODOT LTAP Active Transportation Academy, and there's a link in there. Please commit to having at least 15 participants and having a space available for the training. Those are the only things we ask that you do. Otherwise, my team and I coordinate everything. We probably spend about 30 minutes total emailing and talking with you over the phone in preparation for the training to get some of those customizations included, and then also to make sure that all of the logistics are coordinated. But we're also happy to help you recruit other communities or partners to be a part of the training if you're having a hard time getting to that 15 participant minimum. Also, even if you have 30 people already, it never hurts to try to invite neighbors to come and participate as well, because you could likely learn from one another. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Victoria, but thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope to get some requests for this training trickling in over the next few days, and any of the other trainings that we offer as well.
Thank you so much, Amelia. We're going to go ahead and we're happy to take questions in the chat pod. There were a couple that had come in during the presentation, and hopefully I was able to answer those successfully for you. But any other questions you have, we can either take them there, or I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone's phone lines. So if you've got a party going on in the background, you might want to tell them to tone it down. But I'll go ahead and work on doing that right now. And while I'm doing that, if there's anything else you want to put in the chat pod, you're welcome to do that. I'm just going to go right down the row and unmute people. So I had to do a general unmute, and now I'm unmuting everybody individually. Amelia, you must have done a great job, because I'm not seeing any questions in the chat pod. They're just all waiting for the phone line to be unmuted. If you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to go ahead and try now. Hopefully I've gotten to your phone line and we'll be able to hear you.
People are busy getting emails. I can hear the Outlook notifications.
There we go. There's a question that's come in. Can you see that, Amelia?
Yes. Are regional ATA workshops being scheduled or considered for specific workshops? I don't quite understand the question, Kate.
I just unmuted you, Kate, if you want to give a audio explanation. There's another question for you, Amelia. We'll wait on Kate's clarification.
Someone asked what we mean by the term placemaking. So in generalities, placemaking is the concept of giving an area that is generally nondescript or that people don't identify with some kind of identity. And so this can be done through branding of different signage throughout the community, by putting in different design elements like cohesive planter boxes and street lighting and different bike racks that all look branded to your community and things like that. And so it is like an integration of architecture and design and city planning and engineering kind of all brought together to make sure that a place has an identity where people want to go. And so if people are going there, they're spending money, they're spending time, there's then more of a demand for multimodal transportation options, and then you can see how Complete Streets fits in.
Great. I've got
Hey,
everybody.
can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we've got everybody unmuted, so you're good.
Oh, good. Okay, great. I was wondering if any of these workshops are would be considered for circuit rider or other, standardized ODOT offered workshops, like we're going to district blah and, offering this workshop, everyone can come.
I'll go ahead and take that question if you're all right with that, Amelia.
Yeah.
So the Circuit Rider program is actually the model we have the Active Transportation Academy courses set up on right now. That's where it's requested by an agency for 15 or more people. We have talked about doing just general offerings of the courses and letting people enroll, but a lot of these courses are much better if you have people from the same agency in there, and or maybe surrounding agencies, so you can customize and have that conversation about how do we make this work for our jurisdiction when you walk away from it. So we hadn't really gone to that level yet. We are getting quite a few requests in that we kind of feel like we're on pace right now to be able to continue offering just the circuit rider level courses. But if we get to a point where we feel like, we need to offer additional courses, then we'll take a look at that other model. But that's a great idea, Kate, and we'll definitely keep it in the list of options.
Thanks.
Okay. Boy, for 53 people on this webinar still, you guys are awful quiet. Any other questions from the audience? If not, I think we're good to go then. We will go ahead and send out information via email once the webinar is complete, and make sure you have Amelia's contact information and a link to how you request the courses. So Amelia, thank you so much. You did a great job.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who participated today. We appreciate your time, and just watch for the emails that'll be coming out. Thank you. Take care.